What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another CD collection update for you guys, and finally going over some of the stuff that I got on my last Toledo trip, which was back at the end of February when this video came out. It was towards the end of February when I went up to Toledo, of course, to visit my boys in Thralls of Metal, which of course I did a video with those guys about vocals and bands and such, which I'm sure everybody that's watching this video has seen that video. If you haven't, go check it out. It was an awesome time. But here I am talking about everything that I got in the Toledo trip. Well, this is part one of that. Part two will be probably next week. And then I've been working on another stack of stuff that was sent to me and stuff that I bought. So, yeah, still got stuff coming along the way. But regardless, let's go ahead and get started with this Toledo run. So, kicking things off, we have Agalloch, the Serpent and the Sphere. This is the fifth and final studio album from this Portland or Oregon-based, oh man, black metal, doom metal, folk metal, post metal, progressive metal. They're like a hybrid of so many facets of dark melodic music. And this was the fifth and final full-length offering they had until reuniting a couple of years ago, initially to do some shows. Now they're doing more shows, and there might be a chance we might get some new Agalloch, which, if that does happen, I'm all for it, because I would love to hear some new ideas that the guys may have come up with. But yeah, definitely this album's a lot different from some of the earlier Agalloch albums like Pale Folklore and especially The Mantle. Like this one kind of goes for a little more atonal melodies and a little more dissonant melodies than you would associate with a band like this. Whereas when I think of Agalloch, I think of dark, sad, beautiful songwriting, you know, like The Mantle. That's like a milestone album in metal history. Whereas this is a lot different, but it's still pretty good, I would say. But arguably next to Pale Folklore, it could be considered their weakest. But it doesn't mean it's bad. It's still a very good album. It's just a little bit different than what you expect from Agalloch. But yeah, if you are a fan of Agalloch, chances are you already have this. But if you don't have it, go get it. It's pretty damn good. Next up we have At the Gates, Terminal Spirit Disease. This is the third studio full-length, of course, from these Gothenburg melodic death metal pioneers, and oddly enough, this would be the first album where they actually were proper melodic death metal, because their early EP and their first two albums are still very much rooted in that like classic Swedish death metal sound, whereas here it still has that, but they definitely push more on the melodic aspect of the scene. And this was a great precursor to what would come on Slaughter of the Soul just a year later. And of course, this album was out on Futurist / Peaceville Records at the time. And I'm trying to keep from talking too much about this, considering I might be ranking At the Gates in the future. But I'll just say this was a great precursor to what they would do on their big album. So if you love At the Gates, you probably already have this, but if you haven't listened to it, give it a listen. There's some good stuff on here. Next up, Beherit, Drawing Down the Moon. This is the debut album from this Finnish black metal, blackened death metal, or even some people call them war metal, whatever, but this is the debut album from this Finnish band, I'll just say that. And this is pretty much like a cult classic in the world of black metal, and I know this is kind of a divisive album amongst black metal fans, especially those who are kind of picky about it, like me, where they want their black metal to be more riffy and less about the drone. I would say this kind of leans more towards drone, but there's still enough interesting moments on here that keep it from being a mediocre album. It's actually pretty damn good. Like Solomon's Gate, Nocturnal Evil, Sadomastic Rites, The Gate of Nana. Just vicious songwriting on here, and like the whole concept of moon worship really gives this an eerie vibe for damn sure. So this is probably going to be the only Beherit album or release I'm ever going to get, because I'll be honest, not the world's biggest fan of that type of Finnish black metal, like Impaled Nazarene or Archgoat. It's just not quite my bag, but still, this is some pretty good stuff. It's very influential, so if you love like raw, murky, shit-sounding black metal, this is for you. Next up we have Desultory with Through Aching Aeons. This is the fifth and final studio full-length from this Swedish death metal band. I've been needing to get into this band for a while now, considering I think it was their first album that's like considered like an underrated gem in the world of death metal, and I still need to find that album. And then of course I heard they went through a death and roll shift in the mid to late 90s, but then they broke up, came back for a little while, and they put this album out, and then broke up. I think before this, either before or after this album came out was when the band broke up. But this is actually some pretty solid, straight down the line Swedish death metal. The HM2 tone is very apparent on here. But man, these guys know how to write some nice thrashy pockets, but also some cool like groove moments in there too. Kind of like if you just added HM2 guitars over classic death metal from America a little bit, but still retaining that like punky, crusty sound and influence of the early Swedish death metal sound. Like tracks like Spineless Kingdom, the title track. Some pretty cool stuff on here, and it sucks this was their last album, but at least they ended off with something pretty damn solid, so check it out if you haven't. Next up we have Hideous Divinity, Simulacrum. This is the fourth studio full-length from this Italian brutal technical death metal band. Because I was such a big fan of their last album that came out last year, Unextinct, I was like, you know what, I need to check out some more Hideous Divinity, and I picked up, this was the only one that I found. This was the album that came out before Unextinct back in 2019, and yeah, it's Hideous Divinity. It is nasty, but very, very technical, not in the jack-off wankery on the fretboard kind of technical. It's like technically complex, but still very brutal. Like, again, I think a lot of people would compare this band to Nile for damn sure, but I also hear a little bit of Behemoth in this band. There's even little aspects of like Hate Eternal. Of course, there are peers from Italy like Hour of Penance and Flesh God Apocalypse, but still pretty gnarly songwriting on this one. I don't know if I like it, even though I'm still new to this band. It's going to be kind of hard for me to find something I like more than Unextinct, but we'll see as I keep going along with this band. So if you're a fan of Nile, Behemoth, Hate Eternal, Hour of Penance, definitely check out Hideous Divinity. Next up we have Inanimate Existence with Calling from a Dream. This is the third studio full-length from this, I actually forgot where they're from, but they're a technical progressive death metal band. I'm trying to remember because I feel like I have heard this band in passing, or at least heard an album. I want to say it might have been the album after this that I heard, and I thought it was really, really good. And this was on Unique Leader Records. I think they're still on Unique Leader, which makes them kind of stand out considering they're a little bit more melodic. Actually, a lot more melodic than a lot of bands on Unique Leader, because Unique Leader is more all about brutal death metal, whereas it does get brutal in spots, but it's all about like intricate songwriting and like progressive song structures, and not afraid to show off a little bit of melody, whether it be in adding female vocals or the guitar work being melodic. But this is some pretty solid stuff. I wish I remember the album I heard from this band, so that way I can actually make a proper comparison, but I can't really remember off the top of my head. But other than that, this is still some pretty good tech death or progressive death metal. It's just kind of like a hybrid of both, kind of like an American Obscura to a certain degree. So if you're a fan of Obscura, you might like Inanimate Existence. Alright, next up we have a pair from Job for a Cowboy. We have their second album, Ruination, and their third album, Demonocracy. So I've been needing to get more of Job for a Cowboy's older material, considering I have the last two albums, Sun Eater and Moon Healer, and I thought both of those albums are fantastic. More Sun Eater for me. So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to their roots before they went more towards prog death. Ruination, I remember the first song I ever heard from Job for a Cowboy ever was Unfurling a Darkened Gospel. And I thought, man, this is a vicious, brutal, technical wizardry song. And it's just going for all sorts of styles of death metal. Like, you get some brutal moments, you get a lot of tech death. Maybe a tiny hint of where they were wanting to go on Sun Eater with a little hint of prog, but not really a whole lot. And then, of course, a lot of, like, straight up death metal on here. But, I mean, the opener, Unfurling a Darkened Gospel, remains one of my favorite Job for a Cowboy albums. So yeah, this is a must-have if you're a fan of Job for a Cowboy's non-deathcore material. This is really good. And then Demonocracy, which was the follow-up. This one kind of hints at where they were going to go on Sun Eater a little bit more, but it's still very much like a continuation from Ruination a little bit. But I would say the production on here is a little bit more gritty. It's still pretty polished, but there is a little layer of grit over top of it. I don't remember who produced it. I want to say it was Jason Sukoff. Could have been Mark Lewis. It's one of the two because their production styles are pretty close. But still, Job for a Cowboy, I think, deserved more appreciation. Hell, even the Doom EP, they're back in their deathcore era, I don't think is bad. I think it's solid for that style. But thankfully, they did shift to death metal immediately after. So, yeah, check out some Job for a Cowboy non-deathcore stuff. Alright, and we have another pair, this time from Khemmis. We have their debut album, Absolution, and their EP, Doomed Heavy Metal. I've been needing to get the rest of the Khemmis discography for a little bit, because I was such a huge fan of their last album. I think it was called Deceiver. I hope we get some new Khemmis at some point this year, because I would love to hear it, because I've become a pretty solid fan of this band, and getting to hear their roots, and yeah, it's definitely foretelling of how they are, with those somewhat like classic metal moments, but occasionally like death doom parts, but still very much a doom metal band. And yeah, it's just really cool to have their debut. Now with the Doomed Heavy Metal EP, it's just got, I think it's like a few live tracks and one original song, Empty Throne, but their cover of Dio's Rainbow in the Dark, very unique take on that song, doing it in a doom metal style. And I think it works. I actually do think it works. So yeah, this is a pretty cool EP just to have for the covers, and Empty Throne being a pretty solid tune. But yeah, gotta love me some Khemmis. So I have everything that they have now until they put out something else. Alright, we only got a few more left. Next up we have Melechesh with Enki. This is the 6th and most recent studio full-length from this. Oh, I mean, they're international because you got members from Israel and Germany and a few other places. But their scene on the archives is like blackened death metal slash folk metal. I think that's accurate for the most part. However, I would say early on they had a little more thrash tendencies on there. So it's almost like this band I see get compared the most to Absu and Nile. They're like somehow like right in the middle of both bands, because you do get some pretty brutal moments on this album, but you do get some thrash and a little bit of black metal, and definitely get a chunk of death metal. And the folk aspects are just peppered in. It's not like the main central point of this album. Although I think they were probably more folky in their older albums, which I've not really listened to Melechesh. I hear they're an amazing band, and I can believe that. I just have not gotten around to listening to them, because there's just so many bands out there. It's like I'd like to get to everything, but there's only so many hours in a day, and I do plenty of other things. But I digress. But it is cool to finally have some Melechesh, and this was out in 2015, so it's been 10 years. Could we get a new album? Hopefully? We'll see. Alright, next up we have Mortiferum, Disgorged from Psychotic Depths. This is the debut full-length from this Washington-based Death Doom band. However, I would argue this is perhaps a little bit more towards death metal than straight-up Death Doom a lot of times because, man, especially on Inhuman Effigy, big blasts and gnarly, nasty tremolos before it does eventually slow down. But yeah, I have their latest album, and I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but it was 2021 when that came out. We need a new Mortiferum album pretty soon. But it's cool that I got the debut as well, so I have both albums, and while I still need to listen to them both like back to back to kind of understand like which album's the better of the two, but still, it's cool to have some more Mortiferum in my collection since I'm becoming a bigger fan of that more like cavernous death metal sound, which definitely this band fits in that realm for sure. But yeah, check it out if you haven't. Next up we have Mr. Bungle, The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny demo. This is the 4th studio full-length from this supergroup of weirdness, avant-garde, progressive, alternative metal, art rock, whatever you want to call it. However, this is none of those things. This album is a straight-up thrash metal album, but then again, it's basically a re-recording of their Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny demo from, I think it was 86, when they were kind of more of like a death thrash band early on, because I know like Mike Patton was really into the early death metal sound, like especially death. Like he was a big fan of Chuck, a big fan of the band as a whole. Kind of wanted to incorporate that into the early Mr. Bungle stuff, which that's essentially what these songs are. But this version, it's less death thrash and more just straight up thrash. Plus the lineup, having Scott Ian and Dave Lombardo in the band, along with Trevor, Trey, and Mike. And they just come out unleashing hell immediately. I mean, Anarchy Up Your Anus. That is a barn burner of a song, like vicious riffs and awesome gang vocals. And you can tell Scott Ian's on here, not only in his riffs, but when he's in the gang vocals, it's kind of undeniable to hear that. I'm not sure of the saying. I'm just kind of spitballing at this point. But still, pretty killer stuff right here. If you've slept on this album for whatever reason, do yourself a service and check it out. And finally, we have Pythian with Understanding in Light. This is the 2nd EP from this Toledo-based sludge slash stoner slash doom metal band. It's kind of like all over the place. Funny thing about this one, this was actually given to me when I went to one of the record places up there. The cashier that I bought some of the stuff from this trip from actually gave this album to me because he's in the band. I didn't get his name, but he's in this band. And while I'm not the world's biggest fan of, like stoner and sludge, this is some pretty heavy and riffy stoner sludge doom. Kind of like Sleep, maybe a little bit of High on Fire, and like The Sword, kind of that vein of things. It's kind of like a hodgepodge of those bands, but maybe just a notch sludgier. But yeah, it's like heavy guitar tone. It's a little bit fuzzy, which kind of lends itself to that more stoner metal vibe. But still, this is a pretty solid EP from this pretty young band. They haven't had a full length out yet. They've only had a compilation and 2 EPs, and this is the 2nd of the EPs. But still, this is some pretty solid stuff. If you like underground stuff and you like sludge, stoner, and doom, check this out. And that does it for this collection update. So hopefully next week I'll have the second part of the Toledo trip update for you guys. And then, of course, working on a stack right now. It's kind of small at the moment, only 7 albums. 4 of them were actually gifted to me by a special someone. So be on the lookout for that, hopefully in a month, depending on my buying rate. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. What was your favorite album out of everything I showed off this time around? Let me know in the comments below. But until next time, thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.